The rain was a constant companion in Oakhaven. It wasn't the dramatic, cleansing kind of rain. It was the persistent, bone-chilling drizzle that seeped into your clothes and your soul, reflecting the town's perpetual gloom. Oakhaven felt trapped, nestled deep in a valley where the sun seemed to forget to shine. Even in the height of summer, a perpetual twilight clung to the shadowed streets, and the ancient oaks that ringed the town seemed to absorb what little light dared to break through the cloud cover. For as long as I could remember, Oakhaven had been different. Not different in a quirky, charming way. Different in a way that prickled the skin and made the hairs on your arms stand on end when you walked home alone after dark. Things just felt off. The townsfolk, for the most part, were quiet, almost withdrawn. Smiles were rare, and conversations were often clipped and guarded. It was like everyone was holding onto a secret, a dark secret that permeated the very air we breathed. My name is Charles, and like many in Oakhaven, I was born here, raised here, and probably destined to die here. But unlike most, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong with this place. Maybe it was the late nights spent reading detective novels under the covers with a flashlight, or maybe it was just a natural inclination, but I've always been drawn to mysteries, to the things that hide beneath the surface. I wasn't alone in my unease. Eva and Josh, my two best friends since we were kids building forts in the woods behind the old mill, felt it too. Eva was the brains of our little operation. Sharp, analytical, with a memory like steel trap, she could dissect a situation and piece together the fragments with an almost unnerving accuracy. Josh, on the other hand, was the heart and the muscle when needed. He was fiercely loyal, brave, to the point of recklessness, and possessed a natural intuition that often surprised even Eva and me. Together, we were, in our own minds at least, the unofficial investigators of Oakhaven. It started subtly, like a persistent itch you can't quite reach. Whispers, rumors, and unsettling incidents that, individually, could be dismissed as coincidence or small-town gossip. But taken together, they painted a picture that was increasingly disturbing. The first thing that really caught our attention was the disappearances. Over the past year, 3 people had vanished from Oakhaven. Old Man Hemlock, who lived alone in the woods on the outskirts of town. Mrs. Gable, the baker's wife, a cheerful woman known for her cinnamon rolls. And most recently, a young boy named Tommy Miller, a kid no older than 10. The official explanation was always the same. Old Man Hemlock had probably wandered off into the woods and gotten lost. He was getting on in years after all. Mrs. Gable, stressed by the bakery and her ailing mother, had likely run off to clear her head. And Tommy Miller, well, he was just a kid, probably playing hide-and-seek and would turn up eventually. Except they never did. The police investigation, spearheaded by Sheriff Brody, a man well past his prime and seemingly content to let things slide, was cursory at best. Small-town disappearances happens all the time. He mumbled to anyone who dared to question him, puffing on his ever-present cigarette. People move on, get lost, don't want to be found. But we knew Oakhaven. People didn't just move on from Oakhaven. It was a town that clung to you, a town you were born into, and more often than not died in. And the idea that a 10-year-old boy would just not want to be found was ludicrous. It's more than just disappearances, though, isn't it? Eva had said one rainy afternoon, hunched over a table in my basement, surrounded by maps of Oakhaven, newspaper clippings about the disappearances, and notebooks filled with our sprawling theories. The basement, with its damp concrete walls and single flickering light bulb, had become our makeshift headquarters. Josh, leaning back in a rickety chair, nodded slowly. Yeah, it's the feeling. Like something's watching us. Like the town itself is holding its breath. I knew exactly what they meant. It wasn't just the disappearances, it was the way people looked at you sometimes, a strange, knowing glint in their eyes that vanished as quickly as it appeared. It was the hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when you walked into the general store, the way people seemed to avoid eye contact, the almost palpable sense of dread that hung in the air like the ever-present mist. Remember what Mrs. Henderson said? Josh prompted, referring to an elderly woman who lived across the street from Eva. Mrs. Henderson, prone to rambling stories and conspiracy theories, was usually dismissed as slightly senile. But sometimes, buried in her rambling, were nuggets of unsettling information. About the chanting? I asked, making a face. Mrs. Henderson was convinced she had heard chanting coming from the woods late at night. Eva and I had initially dismissed it as her imagination. Yeah, the chanting, Josh said, his voice lower now. And the bonfires. She said she saw bonfires in the woods, flickering through the trees on nights when there was no reason for them. No camping, no town events, nothing. Eva tapped a pen against the table, her brow furrowed in thought. Mrs. Henderson also mentioned symbols. Strange symbols carved into trees near the old Blackwood Trail. So they weren't ordinary carvings. The Blackwood Trail. It was a rarely used path that wound deep into the woods, leading to the abandoned Blackwood mine, a relic of Oak Haven's now dormant mining past. It was a place locals generally avoided, shrouded in whispers and rumors of accidents and bad luck. Symbols, chanting, bonfires, disappearances, I murmured, connecting the dots in my head. It sounds cultish. The word hung in the air, heavy and unsettling in the damp basement. We'd joked about Oak Haven being a bit Stepford Wives-esque before, but the idea of an actual cult operating within our small town, under our noses, felt terrifyingly plausible. Eva straightened up, her eyes, usually sparkling with amusement, now serious and focused. Okay, let's not jump to conclusions. But we can't ignore this either. We need to investigate. Investigate what, exactly? Josh asked, running a hand through his messy brown hair. We're not cops, Eva. We're just kids. Teenagers. Eva corrected him with a slight smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. And you're forgetting, Josh, we're teenagers who are a lot smarter than Sheriff Brody and half the town put together. We're going to look into these disappearances, and we're going to find out what's going on in Oak Haven. And that's how it started. Our amateur investigation into the unsettling undercurrents of Oak Haven. It began innocently enough, with us piecing together rumors, revisiting the sites of the disappearances, and trying to talk to townsfolk without raising suspicion. Our first step was the Blackwood Trail. If there were symbols carved into trees, we needed to see them. We planned our expedition for the next day, a Saturday, when we could spend the entire afternoon without arousing too much suspicion. Saturday dawned as gray and overcast as any other day in Oak Haven. The rain had stopped, but the air hung heavy with moisture, and a thick fog clung to the lower parts of town, swirling around our ankles as we walked towards the edge of the woods. We met at the old oak tree at the entrance to the Blackwood Trail, the same oak tree where we'd made our childhood pact to always stick together, no matter what. Eva was already there, her backpack slung over her shoulder, a determined look on her face. Josh arrived a few minutes later, his usual easygoing grin slightly subdued, a small backpack in hand. Ready? Eva asked, her gaze meeting mine. As I'll ever be, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. A shiver, not entirely from the damp air, ran down my spine. Josh just nodded, his jaw set. He was the quietest of the three of us, but when he was determined, there was a quiet intensity about him that was more powerful than any amount of bluster. The Blackwood Trail was overgrown and rarely used. Branches snagged at our clothes, and the undergrowth was thick and damp, squelching under our feet. The air in the woods was heavy, still, and strangely silent. Even the birds seemed to have deserted this part of the forest. An unnerving quiet, broken only by the rustling of leaves and our own breathing. As we ventured deeper, the trees closed in around us, their branches forming a dense canopy that blocked out what little light there was. The fog seemed to thicken, clinging to the ground like ghostly tendrils, swirling around our feet and obscuring the path ahead. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the air grew colder, heavy with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. Mrs. Henderson said the symbols were about a mile in, near the creek. Eva said, consulting a small, hand-drawn map she'd sketched based on Mrs. Henderson's vague directions. We walked in silence for a while, our eyes scanning the trees on either side of the trail. The woods here were old growth, the trees ancient and gnarled, their bark thick and ridged. Every shadow seemed to writhe, Every rustle of leaves sounded like a whispered warning. The feeling of being watched intensified, a weight pressing down on us from all sides. Then, Josh stopped abruptly, pointing to a large oak tree just off the trail. "Guys, look at this." We followed his gaze. Carved into the bark of the oak, etched deep into the wood, were symbols. They weren't casual carvings. They were deliberate, precise, almost ritualistic. A circle with a downward-pointing triangle inside, intertwined lines that resembled snakes, and other symbols that were unfamiliar and unsettling. They were crude, yet disturbing, and they definitely weren't the work of casual vandals. These were symbols with intent, symbols that spoke of something else, something dark. Eva stepped closer, pulling out a small notebook and a pencil. She carefully sketched the symbols, her brow furrowed in concentration. I circled the tree, examining the carvings from different angles. They were repeated in several places, almost hidden amongst the natural ridges of the bark, as if meant to be seen, but not easily noticed. "This is creepy," Josh murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. He shifted from foot to foot, glancing nervously around at the surrounding trees. "Creepy is an understatement," Eva replied, her voice tight. She finished sketching the symbols and looked up at us, her eyes wide. "I've seen symbols like this before. In books, old texts, they're occult symbols." Occult. The word sent another chill down my spine. Occult, as in witchcraft, dark magic, secret societies. The stuff of dime store novels and late-night horror movies. But in Oakhaven, in these woods, surrounded by these unsettling symbols, it suddenly felt very real. "Occult?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow in the silent woods. "Are you sure?" Eva nodded slowly. "Pretty sure. The downward-pointing triangle, that's often associated with earth or demonic forces. And the snakes could be serpent worship or regeneration in a very twisted sense." She shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. "This is not good, guys. This is really not good." We stood there for a moment, the three of us, staring at the carved symbols, the unsettling quiet of the woods pressing in on us. The fog seemed to swirl closer, the shadows deepening around the ancient trees. The playful intention of a Saturday afternoon hike had vanished, replaced by a heavy sense of unease, a growing dread that something was terribly wrong in Oakhaven, something far more sinister than we had initially imagined. "We need to show this to someone," Josh said finally, breaking the silence. "Sheriff Brody?" Eva shook her head immediately. "No, Sheriff Brody will laugh us out of his office. He'll say it's kids playing pranks or Mrs. Henderson's imagination running wild again. He won't take us seriously." "Then who?" I asked, feeling a growing sense of helplessness. Who in Oakhaven would believe us? Who would even care? Eva was silent for a moment, her gaze distant, lost in thought. Then, her eyes sharpened, focusing on me with a new intensity. "There's one person, someone who might believe us, someone who knows Oakhaven better than anyone." "Who?" Josh and I asked in unison. Eva took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on mine. "Adam Sitterling. Adam Sitterling, the mayor of Oakhaven, a man of quiet authority, respected by the townsfolk, and my uncle, my mother's younger brother. We hadn't seen much of him since my parents passed away a few years back. He'd been distant, wrapped up in his mayoral duties, or so we assumed." "Your uncle?" Josh asked, surprised. "You think Mayor Sterling will believe us?" "I don't know," Eva admitted, her voice uncertain. "But he's our best shot. He's always been different, more open-minded than most people in Oakhaven. And he cares about this town. If anyone will take this seriously, it might be him." I hesitated. My relationship with Uncle Adam had been strained since my parents' death. Grief had created a distance between us, a wall of unspoken emotions. But Eva was right. Who else could we turn to? "Okay," I said finally, more to convince myself than them. "Okay, we'll talk to Uncle Adam." The decision made, a sliver of resolve cut through the fear. We gathered ourselves, the unsettling symbols burned into our minds. We retraced our steps slowly, the woods seeming to watch us, to listen to our every move. As we emerged back onto the main trail, The fog seemed to dissipate slightly, as if the woods themselves were reluctant to release us from their grasp. We walked back towards town in silence, each of us grappling with the weight of what we had discovered. Occult symbols in the woods, disappearances, whispers of chanting and bonfires. It was all starting to coalesce into something terrifying, something that threatened to shatter the fragile peace of Oakhaven. As we reached the edge of town, the familiar gray houses of Oakhaven looked different somehow, tainted by the darkness we had glimpsed in the woods. The quiet streets, once just peaceful, now seemed ominous, hiding secrets behind every closed door, every drawn curtain. We decided to go to Mayor Sterling's office immediately. The urgency of the situation pressed down on us, a feeling that we couldn't afford to wait, that every moment we delayed was a moment the darkness in Oakhaven could spread further, tighten its grip. The mayor's office was located in the Old Town Hall, a sturdy brick building that stood at the center of Oakhaven, its clock tower a silent sentinel watching over the town. The building was usually quiet, almost deserted, but today it felt strangely empty. We walked up the creaking wooden steps to the main entrance and pushed open the heavy oak doors. The reception area was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of old paper and dust. The receptionist, Mrs. Davison, a woman who had worked for the town for as long as anyone could remember, wasn't at her desk. The office was deserted. "That's weird," Josh murmured, glancing around. "Where is everyone? Maybe it's lunchtime?" Eva suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. It was only mid-afternoon. We walked down the hallway towards Mayor Sterling's office, our footsteps echoing in the silence. The door to his office was closed. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob. It felt strangely wrong to be intruding on my uncle's private space, especially given the distance between us. But the memory of the symbols in the woods, the unsettling feeling of dread, pushed me forward. I knocked softly on the door. Silence. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. "Uncle Adam," I called out, my voice echoing in the empty hallway. "It's Charles. Are you there?" No response. A growing sense of unease tightened my chest. It wasn't just the empty office. It was the unsettling silence, the heavy atmosphere, the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. I reached for the doorknob and slowly, cautiously, turned it. The door clicked open, swinging inwards to reveal darkness. The office was dark, the curtains drawn, blocking out the already meager daylight. A heavy, musty smell hung in the air like old books and something else, something faintly metallic. "Uncle Adam," I called out again, stepping cautiously into the office. Eva and Josh followed close behind, their faces etched with concern. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I could make out the shapes of furniture, a large wooden desk, bookshelves lining the walls, a leather armchair in the corner. But there was something else in the room, something that made my breath catch in my throat. On the floor, in the center of the room, was a symbol, drawn in what looked like blood, a circle with a downward-pointing triangle inside. The same symbol we had seen carved into the trees in the Blackwood Woods. And then I saw him, Uncle Adam, slumped over his desk, his head resting on his arms. He was motionless, completely still. A strangled gasp escaped Eva's lips. Josh took a step back, his eyes wide with horror. My blood ran cold. I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me, the musty smell of the office suddenly overpowering. "Uncle Adam," I cried out, rushing forward. I reached out, my hand trembling, and gently touched his shoulder. He didn't move. His body was cold. Too cold. Panic flared in my chest, hot and suffocating. I shook his shoulder harder. "Uncle Adam, wake up." He still didn't move. And then, slowly, dreadfully, his head lolled to the side, revealing his face. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling, their pupils dilated and unfocused. His face was pale, almost ashen, and around his neck, etched into his skin, were more symbols. The same twisted, unsettling symbols we had found in the woods. Symbols of the occult. Symbols of something dark and ancient, something evil that had taken root in Oakhaven. And now It had reached my uncle, the mayor of Oakhaven. My uncle was dead, and it wasn't just death. It was something more, something ritualistic, something terrifying. We stared at him, frozen in horror, the silence of the office broken only by our ragged breaths. The truth, cold and brutal, slammed into us with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just whispers and rumors anymore. This wasn't just disappearances. This was real. This was happening. There was a cult in Oakhaven, an evil cult, and they had just sacrificed my uncle, the mayor, right at his own office, in the heart of our small, dark, mysterious town. And we, 3 teenage detectives, had just stumbled right into the middle of it. Our investigation had just taken a horrifying and very personal turn, and I had a terrifying feeling this was only the beginning. The flickering fluorescent light above us buzzed, a sickly counterpoint to the silence that had swallowed the mayor's office whole. Just moments ago, it had been filled with the clatter of our hurried footsteps, the breathless whispers of our plans to finally confront Mayor Adam, to ask him the questions that gnawed at us about Oakhaven's strange happenings. Now silence. Thick, suffocating silence, broken only by that damned buzzing light and the frantic thumping of my own heart. The opulent office, usually a symbol of Oakhaven's, albeit meager, authority, was desecrated. Expensive mahogany furniture was overturned, papers scattered like fallen leaves in a storm. The air itself was thick with a cloying, metallic smell that made my stomach churn. And in the center of it all, on the intricately patterned Persian rug that had always seemed too grand for our little town, lay Mayor Adam. Or what was left of him? My uncle. My uncle, Adam Blackwood, the mayor of Oakhaven, the man who had always offered me a wink and a slightly too sweet piece of candy whenever I saw him at town events, lay lifeless, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling, fixed and vacant. His usually neatly combed salt and pepper hair was matted with something dark and glistening. His tailored suit, always impeccable, was ripped and stained. But the suit, the furniture, the scattered papers, none of it was what truly horrified. It was the symbol carved into his chest, a grotesque, spiraling glyph etched deep into his flesh, bleeding sluggishly onto the rug. It wasn't a symbol I recognized, but it radiated a feeling of pure, unadulterated wrongness, a visual scream of something ancient and malevolent. My detective's instinct, honed from years of reading pulp novels and watching crime dramas, screamed cult. My gut, however, screamed something far more primal and terrifying. Eva, usually the most unflappable of us, stood frozen, her hand clamped over her mouth, her usually bright eyes wide and dark with reflected horror. Josh, paler than I'd ever seen him, was swaying slightly, his breathing shallow and rapid. He'd always had a weaker stomach than Eva and me. Even I, who had prided myself on my composure, felt the bile rise in my throat. "Oh God," Josh whispered, his voice cracking. "Oh God, oh God." He kept repeating it like a broken record, a litany of disbelief and terror. Eva finally found her voice, though it was shaky and low. "Charles, is that?" She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence, her eyes glued to the symbol. I swallowed hard, forcing down the nausea. I had to be the strong one, the one who held it together. That was always my role in our little trio. Charles Blackwood, the stoic leader, the one with the plan. Except I didn't have a plan anymore. My plan had been to confront my uncle, to get some answers about the strange things happening in Oakhaven, the disappearances, the whispered rumors of rituals in the woods. Now, my plan was shattered, replaced by a cold, gaping void of horror and fear. "Yes, Eva," I managed, my voice sounding hoarse, unfamiliar even to my own ears. That's him." I couldn't bring myself to say Uncle Adam or Mayor Adam. He was just that, a broken, desecrated body in the middle of a ransacked office, marked by something unspeakable. Eva took a shaky step forward, then stopped, as if an invisible barrier held her back. "The symbol. Charles, what is it?" "I don't know," I admitted, my mind racing, trying to access the fragmented knowledge I'd accumulated over years of obsessive reading about the occult, about forgotten religions, about the dark corners of history that most people prefer to ignore. I don't recognize it, but it's evil, Eva. It feels wrong, in a way that goes beyond just being scary. Josh finally found his footing, stumbling back a few steps away from the gruesome spectacle. He leaned against the wall, his face still ashen. Cult, he croaked. It's gotta be a cult, right? All those stories, all those whispers. The whispers. We'd heard them for years, of course. Oakhaven had always been a town steeped in rumor and shadow. Stories of strange rituals in the woods surrounding the town, of hushed gatherings in old houses, of chanting and firelight. We dismissed them mostly. Teenage folklore, fueled by boredom and too many late-night scary movies. But lately, the whispers had become louder, more insistent, and the events more tangible. The disappearances started subtly. First, old Mr. Hemlock, the reclusive librarian, vanished without a trace. Then, Sarah Jenkins, the baker's daughter, who'd always been a bit different, quiet, and withdrawn, just disappeared one morning on her way to work. The police, Sheriff Brody in particular, a man whose competence we'd always secretly questioned, had chalked it up to runaways or old age and confusion in Mr. Hemlock's case. But we'd known something was off. Oakhaven didn't have runaways. And Mr. Hemlock, despite his age, was as sharp as a tack. Then there were the animals. Pets going missing. Farm animals found mutilated in the fields. Strange symbols appearing on barns and fences. Vandalism, Sheriff Brody had declared. Teenage pranks, blown out of proportion. But the fear in the town was palpable, a creeping unease that settled like a shroud over Oakhaven. And we, Charles, Eva, and Josh, the self-proclaimed Oakhaven investigators, had decided to look into it. Initially, it was just for kicks, a way to alleviate the boredom of another summer in our sleepy town. We'd started by looking into the disappearances, digging through old town records, interviewing the families, trying to find a pattern, a connection. Our investigation had led us to Mayor Adam. He was, after all, the mayor. He had to know something, right? He was the authority figure, the one who was supposed to protect Oakhaven. We tried to approach him subtly at first, asking vague questions about town safety, about the well-being of the community. He'd been polite, dismissive, paternal, assuring us that everything was fine, that Oakhaven was a safe and peaceful town, that teenagers shouldn't worry their pretty little heads about such things. But we hadn't been deterred. We'd felt the wrongness in Oakhaven, the growing darkness, the sense that something sinister was taking root beneath the surface of our seemingly idyllic town. So, we decided to be less subtle. Tonight, we were going to confront him directly, to ask him about the rumors, about the symbols, about the growing fear that hung heavy in the air of Oakhaven. And now we stood here, in his desecrated office, staring at his sacrificed body, and the horrifying truth crashed down upon us with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just rumors. It wasn't just teenage folklore. There was a cult in Oakhaven, an evil cult, and they had just sacrificed my uncle. It's definitely a cult, I said, confirming Josh's terrified suspicion. My voice was stronger now, the initial shock beginning to recede, replaced by a cold, hard knot of anger in my chest. And this is their work. This is what they're doing in Oakhaven. Eva finally moved, stepping cautiously around the overturned desk towards the body. "We need to call the police," she said, her voice still trembling, but firmer now. "Sheriff Brody, he needs to see this." "Brody?" Josh scoffed, pushing himself off the wall. Brody couldn't find his own ass in a phone booth. He'll just say it's, I don't know, a prank gone wrong? Folkmaltschik? He'll bury it, just like he buried everything else. Josh had a point. Sheriff Brody was, well, he was Sheriff Brody. Competent in traffic stops and lost dogs, perhaps. But dealing with this? This was way beyond his pay grade, way beyond anything Oakhaven's small, ill-equipped police force was prepared for. "We still have to call him," Eva insisted, her voice rising slightly. "We can't just leave him here. And we can't just ignore this. This is murder, Charles. Ritualistic murder. We have to do something." She was right. Of course she was right. Even if Brody was incompetent, we had to report it. We couldn't just walk away. pretend we hadn't seen this. But a part of me, a growing, insidious part of me, was screaming against it. Calling the police meant involving outsiders, meant losing control of the situation, meant handing this over to people who probably wouldn't understand, wouldn't believe, or worse, would believe and would try to cover it up to protect Oakhaven's fragile, fabricated image of normalcy. Okay, I said, making a decision, my mind already racing ahead, formulating a new, far more dangerous plan. We'll call Brody, but we see what he does. We watch him, and if he tries to bury this, if he tries to sweep it under the rug. I trailed off, letting the unspoken threat hang in the air. Then what, Charles? Josh asked, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. Then what do we do? I looked from Josh to Eva, their faces etched with worry and fear, but also something else. A spark of that same morbid curiosity, that same thirst for the unknown that had drawn us into this in the first place. We were still teenagers, after all, despite the horror we were facing. And teenagers, even terrified teenagers, had a way of being drawn to the forbidden, to the dangerous. Then, I said, my voice dropping to a low, determined murmur, then we handle it ourselves. We find out who did this. We find out what this cult is. And we stop them, before they hurt anyone else. Eva nodded, her eyes hardening with resolve. We're in this together, right? She said, looking from me to Josh. Josh hesitated for a moment, his gaze flickering back to the body on the floor. But then he straightened his shoulders, took a deep breath, and nodded slowly. Yeah, he said, his voice stronger now. Yeah, we are. We're in this together. We were in over our heads. I knew it. We were 3 teenagers, armed with nothing but our wits, our determination, and a collection of half-baked knowledge gleaned from dusty books and late-night internet searches. We were going up against something ancient, something evil, something that had just brutally murdered the mayor of Oakhaven in his own office. But we were also the only ones who seemed to care. The only ones who were paying attention to the whispers, to the shadows, to the growing darkness that was consuming our town. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Maybe, just maybe, we can make a difference. I pulled out my phone, my hand trembling slightly as I dialed 911. Police, a bored voice answered on the other end. Yes, I said, my voice still rough. We need to report a murder. At the mayor's office. It's Mayor Adam Blackwood. I paused, searching for the right words, but there were none. He's dead, and it's bad, really bad. The bored tone on the other end sharpened instantly. Mayor Blackwood? Dead? What do you mean, bad? Just send someone, I said, cutting her off. Send Sheriff Brody. And tell him it's not just a robbery. It's something else. Something dark. I hung up before she could ask any more questions, my heart pounding in my chest. We stood there in the silence again, the buzzing fluorescent light still casting its sickly glow over the scene of horror. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a cold, creeping dread and a burning determination. Our teenage investigation had just taken a horrifying and very personal turn, and I had a terrifying feeling this was only the beginning. We started our own preliminary investigation right there in the office before the police arrived. Eva, ever the methodical one, started taking pictures with her phone, documenting the scene from every angle. Josh, despite his initial squeamishness, was surprisingly helpful, carefully sifting through the scattered papers on the floor, looking for anything that seemed out of place, anything that could give us a clue. I focused on the symbol. I knelt beside the body, ignoring the nauseating smell, and examined the grotesque glyph carved into my uncle's chest. It wasn't just carved. It was branded, burned into the flesh, the edges blackened and seared. It was definitely ritualistic. This wasn't just random violence. This was a deliberate act, a sacrifice. Anything? Eva asked, snapping another picture of an overturned lamp. The symbol, I said, my voice low, thoughtful. It's carved into his chest. Branded, actually. It's definitely cult-related. I wish I knew what it meant. Maybe there's something in his desk, Josh suggested, gesturing towards the large mahogany desk that dominated one corner of the office. Maybe he kept files, notes, anything that could help us understand what's going on. It was a good idea. We moved to the desk, carefully avoiding the body and the bloodstains. The drawers were all open, pulled out haphazardly, as if someone had been searching for something in a hurry. The contents were scattered across the floor, mixed with the other papers from the desk. We started to sift through the mess, carefully examining each document. Mostly mundane mayoral paperwork, town budgets, meeting minutes, letters from local businesses. But interspersed amongst the mundane were other things. Strange things. A hand-drawn map of the woods surrounding Oakhaven, with certain areas circled in red ink. A list of names handwritten on a piece of expensive stationery. Some names crossed out, others circled. And then, tucked away in a hidden compartment at the back of the desk drawer, we found it. A small, leather-bound book. It was old, the leather cracked and brittle, the pages yellowed and fragile. There were no markings on the cover, but when I carefully opened it, the first page was filled with symbols. Symbols that were disturbingly familiar. Symbols that matched the one branded into my uncle's chest. "Eva, Josh, look at this," I said, my voice hushed with awe and a growing sense of dread. I held up the book, showing them the page of symbols. Eva gasped. That's the symbol," she whispered, pointing to the glyph that we had seen on the mayor's chest. "It's in the book." Josh leaned closer, his eyes wide with fascination and fear. "What is it? A spell book? Some kind of cult manual?" I flipped through the pages of the book carefully. It was filled with more symbols, strange diagrams, and writing in a language I didn't recognize. But mixed in with the cryptic text, I started to see familiar words, names, places. Oakhaven, Blackwood, the woods, the old church on the hill. I said slowly, my voice barely above a whisper, "I think this is it. This is the cult's book. Their ritual book. It's all here." We were interrupted by the sound of sirens wailing in the distance, growing louder as they approached the mayor's office. The police were here. Our time to investigate on our own was over. "For now, we need to take this," I said, quickly closing the book and tucking it inside my jacket. "Before Brody gets here. Before anyone else sees it." Eva nodded, grabbing the map of the woods and tucking it into her backpack. Josh scooped up the list of names and stuffed it into his pocket. We worked quickly, efficiently, like seasoned professionals, years of playing detective games suddenly becoming terrifyingly real. By the time we heard footsteps approaching the office door, we had managed to clear away most of the evidence of our own presence, leaving the scene looking exactly as we had found it. We stepped back from the desk, putting on our best shocked and innocent expressions, just as Sheriff Brody, his face red and flustered, burst into the office, followed by 2 uniformed officers. Brody stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes widening as he took in the scene of carnage. His mouth dropped open, then snapped shut. He looked from the body to us, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "You 3, he said, his voice gruff. "What in God's name are you doing here?" "Sheriff Brody," I said, trying to sound as calm and shocked as possible. We found him. We came to talk to the mayor. And we found him like this." Eva and Josh nodded in agreement, their faces pale and drawn. Eva even managed to produce a few convincing tears. We were good liars. We'd had plenty of practice over the years, covering up our late-night escapades, our secret investigations. Brody stared at us for a long moment, his eyes still narrowed, as if he didn't quite believe us. But then he sighed heavily, rubbing a hand over his face. "All right," he said, his voice weary. "All right, kids, you stay right here. Don't touch anything, and don't go anywhere. I need to call this in." He turned away, pulling out his radio, his face grim. We watched him as he spoke into the radio, his voice low and urgent, requesting backup, crime scene investigators, the whole 9 yards. He was taking it seriously. I had to give him that. Maybe Brody wasn't as incompetent as we'd thought. Or maybe even he couldn't ignore something as horrific as this. As Brody directed the other officers and started to cordoning off the office, we exchanged a quick, furtive glance. We had the book, the map, the list. We had our own investigation to continue. And something told me, as I looked around at the desecrated office, at the symbol of evil branded onto my uncle's chest, that our investigation was far from over. It had only just begun, and it was going to be more dangerous, more terrifying than anything we could have ever imagined. Oakhaven, our quiet, mysterious town, was no longer just mysterious. It was cursed, and we were right in the heart of the curse.